and welcome to Sidekicks, the weekly cybersecurity podcast hosted by Richmond Advisory Group's principal analysts, that's namely me, Rory Duncan.
And me, Christina Richmond. This podcast is your go-to partner for understanding the cybersecurity market, industry trends, and the real-world challenges of protecting organizations today. I wanted to find a special sound, like a kind of celebratory sound. Today is our 20th episode.
Our 20th episode.
Yay!
Hooray. Well, in the editing and post-production, Christina, I shall add something in, either like now, or at some point during which you can virtually celebrate, and certainly our listeners can hear it. So yeah, we're super pleased,
fun.
Very happy. Episode 20, what a milestone. Most podcasts don't reach this.
That's right. Who'da thunk it, my mother used to say. Who'da thunk it? Because here we are. 20 weeks ago, we started, and somehow through travel and conferences and bronchitis and gardening and moving and all kinds of shenanigans, we are still here on the 20th episode. Congratulations, Rory.
Well, thank you, but also congratulations to you for sticking it and also doing it while you were super sick. I thought we might have to, consult with somebody in the afterlife at one point, to be honest.
Do a channel some being from the other side.
Well, maybe it'd be some seance or something. Christina, are you there? Yes. What's happening with you in cybersecurity this week? I don't know. This kind of thing. No, but so luckily that didn't happen and won't ever happen. But there we go. So we managed to reach that, and it's been great. So, next stop is, well, I guess 30, episode 30, 40, 50. I think 50 is probably the next big milestone.
Hey, for folks who haven't signed up yet, I think we should remind them about Signal, Not Noise, our newsletter. It's a monthly newsletter. It's free. What do you get, Rory, when you subscribe?
Well, when you subscribe, you get access to all sorts of interesting things from us, which is in the content of the newsletter. But you'll also get a 4-page extract from our recent AI security survey, looking at how prepared CISOs, C-suite, and senior IT practitioners are in terms of facing AI-powered attacks and what would help them prepare. This is a perception study, folks, which is kind of lifting the lid on what people are thinking or doing, and there's some quite surprising results, I would say.
There are some, We're doing full readouts starting next week with syndicated clients, but we're sharing a little 4-page extract for folks, and I think it will spur some conversation and some insight for them, and hopefully with us. Yeah. So, hey, Rory, you're just back from the London City Airport. What were you doing there this week?
So for those of you who are unaware of London City Airport, so of course anybody goes to the UK, it's usually Heathrow or Gatwick, and these are big airports that are very much on the periphery. Exactly, periphery of London. And it takes you ages to get anywhere from there to there. It's not really London, but London City Airport, which is in the Docklands area, in the east of the city on the Thames, is great if you're going to the XL, which is the big kind of aircraft hangar of a conference venue. Literally, you just get off the plane, and then it's 2 stops one direction, 2 stops the other. You can get there in 20 minutes, which is great. So that's where I was for a few days this week, and that was for InfoSec Europe. So it's kind of like a mini version of RSAC. So it's all about cybersecurity, but probably the focus is more on information security, given the title, and application security as opposed to other forms. But it was a good show. I think it was a little quieter on the first day, in the afternoon of the first day, but yesterday was super busy. Lots of booths, a couple of hundred exhibitors. There were some big companies there. There were lots of kind of startup sector. I had a bunch of scheduled meetings, but I ended up speaking with probably more people just taking a wander around. So some of the key.
That's wonderful. And so before you go there, you were quoted in Info Security magazine as well.
Yeah.
Which I thought, oh, that's so cool that you were quoted. So that's out on LinkedIn, and thanks for sharing that with me. What was that about? How did that happen?
Oh, well, I met one of the journalists who was there, and I hadn't met him before, but I was introduced to him by one of the freelance PR and analyst relations people, of which there are a few in London, because obviously there are a number of technology firms based in London, or they're the European arm of a much bigger company. And they introduced me, and he basically said to me, "Help! I have to file 2 reports by 4 o'clock. What do you know about this?" So in between the meetings, I just wrote a couple of sections of paragraphs for him in LinkedIn, and he used them. So that was great. Nice guy, but obviously he was under a lot of pressure to publish, and because he was freelancing for that magazine.
So yeah, you were going to tell us who you chatted with. What were the meetings and then your little drop-bys?
Yeah, it was good. So I had a great discussion with Akamai. I used to do a lot with Akamai, and they said hi. Christina. Karine was there, so she said hi.
Nice.
She was very pleased to see me again after many years. I also met with Bitdefender, Semperis, Zero Networks, and also Seaside. We met Simon from Seaside at RSAC, which was good. And then I spent some time in the startup area. Lots of small tech firms doing interesting things. Many of them had roots in Israel, of course. It's a kind of tech hub in EMEA, and of course it's easier for those guys to come here, as in to the London area, than to go all the way to the US. So we had RMI Cyber. They released their latest attack surface management product, which they called GARI, Gari, which is good.
Good
acronym. We also had SPLX AI. That was a kind of AI powered pen testing service for AI agents and chatbots.
I asked someone how to pronounce it. I think it's Splix AI.
Really?
Even though it's SPLX.
SPLX. Okay.
Splix. But it's Splix.
It's
Splix AI.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
There was Karata. They did EDR for mobile platforms only. So, small company, very specialized in Android and iOS only. And the other one was, I saw Commugen. They specialize in governance, risk, and compliance, GRC automation, which they kind
it's an interesting blend that you got to chat with. I mean, folks doing single area solutions. Maybe it's a product or a platform like Gary from RMI Cyber, or maybe it's a service that they've put into certain platform capabilities like Commugen with the GRC, the governance, risk, and compliance stuff. But then very singular, as you said, very small companies like Corrado doing the EDR for mobile platforms. Fascinating that you had quite a broad swath of companies. What was there much going on there about? I mean, we just got barraged at RSAC with AI and agentic AI. Was there much going on at InfoSec in Europe?
I mean,
there
was some. I've probably mentioned this before when I did our Cloud and Cybersecurity Expo earlier this year.
Right.
Again, there was, less overt talk about AI in general than I saw at RSAC, for instance. And then, as I mentioned in my notes, some of it was sort of apologetic in nature, in as much as, oh, well, we kind of have to talk about this, or let's talk about AI. But what I noticed, there was much less discussion about agentic AI. I was ready for it, having, that was one of the key topics that was discussed at RSAC. Much less discussion, right. Even when I pointedly asked some of the, let's say, the most knowledgeable people that I met, they kind of went, yeah, I mean, it's there, but it's kind of a bit earlier, a bit too niche. When I'm talking about, threats, where are, some of the more obvious AI-based threats like indirect prompt injection or whatever we've talked about on the show, people were like shrugging their shoulders and saying, yeah, I even asked about things like, AI-created malware, and folk were saying, well, kind of, but whatever's created is so terrible and awful that it's very easy to see through it. So I think there were probably more discussions about quantum and PQC than agentic AI, which is interesting because
so interesting,
mm,
right? Because quantum is even more ephemeral in a way
mm,
than, because Gen AI is here today. Agentic AI is here and growing quite rapidly from what we saw at RSAC and from all the conversations we've been having. And then to have this sort of lack of conversation about AI and
mm,
agentic AI might just be a cultural thing. Well, hey, we're going to believe in it when it's real. But then PQC or quantum stuff
mm,
to me is even further out and more ephemeral and less tangible. So that's
yeah,
fascinating to me.
yeah. I mean, it may well be the the kind of cross section of people that I spoke to, but certainly
Mm.
there was more talk about that than I saw, for instance, at RSAC. And I mentioned before, there was that company that were doing governance, risk, and compliance solutions. There was a lot more of that. In other words, you could have a chat about it. I certainly had a number of vendors who were, nodding in agreement when we talked about the fact that certain geographies are much more open to regulatory environments, whether involving government or large providers, versus other geographies or other administrations who don't particularly like that kind of level of interference. Certainly, if you've got a show in the UK and an event that's based in Europe, as this one was, you're going to see a lot
Mm.
more of that as an acceptable topic to then discuss and to solution, because you don't have the same kind of opposition to it at a state level, for instance. So
Interesting. And
um,
you do have such a heavy emphasis on GDPR
yeah.
and the likes. I mean, we have regulatory controls in the US and globally, of course, but
Mm-hmm.
that's interesting that there was more focus on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, and you'll love this, Christina, because we've talked about this a lot, and we talked about this a lot at RSAC as well. So here's a common element that I had numerous discussions about. Actually, never mind the technology, never mind about AI. What the most important thing we're hearing from clients is the importance of data hygiene, operation
Mm-hmm.
resilience, and security. So
Yep.
people talking about, oh, we have to do the basics well, oh, there's no point in bringing in this technology if your operational security isn't up to scratch. It's only going to make things worse or whatever. So we'll talk more about that later, and perhaps a guest that we have on might talk about that. But again, back to basics, right? Irrespective of whether it's cloud, whether it's AI, whether it's whatever technology, get the basics right in security, and that sets you up for any implementation you might have for new technology.
Yeah, indeed. So, were there any puppies or monster trucks or goats at the show?
No. However, what was interesting was, do you remember the Whiz booth at RSAC,
Oh,
Christina?
yes,
It was
I
like
do.
a huge candy store. Remember that?
It was, yes, it was great.
Well, Whiz wasn't there, but there were a couple of booths that looked like huge candy stores. One that had these kind of, it's a old UK style of sweet shop where you have different kind of boiled sweets and jelly
Mm.
sweets based in glass jars, and you get a kind of a little paper bag with, a usually a quarter pound or something like that in. One was like that. That drew a lot of interest. Another one had it kind of was like this kind of battling card theme. These kind of rogue-like battle card based games where you have a blue knight or a black knight, or you have some kind of magical being, and you put the cards down on the table and they kind of battle each other out. There was one that was like that.
Kind of
And
like a Pokemon
yeah,
game or something
kind of
like
like
that.
that,
Yeah.
which
Okay.
culturally is a thing. And
Yeah.
those were getting a lot of people going in because it didn't look like a technology booth. It didn't look like something that was lines of code, and it looked fun. And those were the booths that were having people at them. The one was my favorite though, and I'll send you a video afterwards. It was the Cyber House Party booth. Woohoo!
Was
But
it like Animal House kind
well,
of?
it was. I guess it was more tasteful than that. But they were like a non-profit. They were raising money for children's charity, and they had. So I
Oh.
got a T-shirt from there, which is a Cyber House Party T-shirt. Woohoo! Lots of high tempo music and flashing lights. So that was a highlight. People were kind of looking askance at it, thinking, "What on earth?" And
What
probably,
on earth?
if it was in the US, that kind of colorful extrovert dancing around would be quite acceptable and normal. But I think for jolly old England, where London, London, it was a little bit much, maybe. Anyway.
When I first became an analyst, somebody said to me, "Welcome to the island of misfit toys."
Ooh.
And I said, "Yes, and I am one."
Is it like? That's a good analogy. Is it like, the toys in Toy Story, the ones that everybody thought were evil because they'd been made by the bad boy next door? The ones that was
No,
like,
no, and I know what you're talking about, but the reference is to the Christmas show with Burl Ives, where there's
ah,
is it Harvey? There's the dentist, and he doesn't want to be a dentist, and all the toys that weren't made well end up on this island, and it's the island for
oh,
misfit toys.
oh
It's
dear.
the one with the abominable snowman and
Uh huh.
Burl Ives. I can't remember the name. May just be Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I think that might be just what it's
Okay.
called, but
All right.
it's great. It's a great reference.
This week's special guest is Ryan LaSalle, CEO of Nisos. Hey Ryan, thanks for being a guest on the show. It's great to have you on.
Thanks, Rory. I'm excited to be here.
Ryan, you get the 20th episode pin. We don't actually have a pin, but congratulations for joining us on our 20th episode.
Mm.
Congratulations on having 20 episodes. It's an accomplishment to be that consistent and determined. So good job.
Yeah, I think statistically, I think we're in a single digit of podcasts that reach this point, literally.
Yeah, so Ryan, we know each other, I don't know, a bunch of years now, back when you were running the Americas for cybersecurity services over at Accenture, right?
That's right.
And
And all over the world
before.
together.
We have been all over the world together. That's right. Oh gosh, the shenanigans. Yeah, I've used that word twice now in this podcast. I guess I'm feeling quite spicy, right? A
Spicy.
little. So, okay, so let's be serious a little bit here. So, Ryan, you have really changed gears over the last year or so, and I love the direction that you're in, or the what you're doing now, because Nisos is about human risk management. It's about executive protection, and I find that to be aligned with cybersecurity, of course, but it's also much broader. So let me start where I usually start, which is, what keeps you up at night in your new gig? What keeps you up at night?
Sure. I think it's a great question, and one I think a lot of security leaders have always wrestled with. Some
Yeah.
always give that answer of I sleep great, and that's great. They have a very high risk tolerance and a very uh, difficult time being flustered. But I do sleep pretty well. But I think the thing I think about when my brain is idle and haven't pumped it full of podcasts and aren't running around with the kids, the thing that does keep me up, I think, is just how uncharted some of the key risks that we're facing in human risk really are. How much the digital footprint of our lives has created an amplification, not just of cyber attacks, but of all kinds of new harms that we're just starting to understand. Whether it's things that are societal, like what we're doing to our kids and their levels of anxiety, or things that are more organizational, like how anger at a brand can rapidly turn into threats of violence to its people. And that notion of how do we get through this and how do we counter it? I think we're getting pretty good at detecting. We're still unsophisticated at how we respond.
I don't think we've had someone talk about psychological
No,
challenges, right?
no.
Or cultural, societal challenges in the way Ryan just
Did.
brought it up. And that's, whew. Well, and so tell us about how this philosophical conundrum that you just brought up, how it factors into things like executive protection and then human risk management. And we got to talk on Monday, so I had this lovely briefing, and I have a better understanding of human risk management at this particular moment than one of the pieces of it, the executive protection, or maybe I
Mm-hmm.
have that backwards and you can school me on it. But I'm fascinated how this philosophical conundrum factors into your day to day.
If I take just a step back, I'll spend a minute trying to define human risk because I think that that is a helpful framing. But at its most simple, I see it as risks to people and risks by people.
Mm,
And it manifests in a lot of different ways. I think the market is evolving in what it includes and how it thinks through those challenges. I think historically it has been the evolution of security awareness and training and how we create harder targets inside of our business by making sure that the people are better attuned to I'll say, the cyber threats that are coming at them, whether it's phishing or other
mm-hmm.
things, just trying to make sure that um, the ill-informed or accidental behaviors that expose a company to risk are tamped down through the way to measure the behaviors of those people. And I think
It's like
increasingly,
hardening, it's like
yeah,
hardening a device or asset software, but hardening the humans in a way
yeah,
to
and I
help
think
them be more resistant.
and I think that's where the space we're encouraging it to be even broader because I think the way that we see this world is that inside all those human risk challenges, there's a person behind all of them. The machines aren't yet autonomous and attacking us. It is a person who is setting them at their targets and doing harm to our people and to our companies. And I think the digital footprint of our businesses, the advances of AI, the ways that geopolitical tensions and relationships are manifesting themselves in new techniques for undermining different societies. It just keeps getting bigger as you pull on the threads. It gets more and more complicated and more interwoven. So where I spend a lot of my time is thinking through where can we see those? How do we get under the cover of those key risks? How do we categorize them better? And then how do we build solutions to help companies and other organizations, governments address those risks?
So, call out a few human risks, specific types of risks or things you've seen, just some anecdotes, because I think we can ground it and make it real for our listeners. What is a human risk?
I think the two that are most in the press right now, for the last 6 months, one is that targeting of executives, whether that's
Mm,
the consistent and persistent targeting on social media and on fringe social media, threatening to do harm to people, calling out bounties on people, and how that motivates and mobilizes acts of physical violence in the real world, not just in the digital world. That physical
right?
and digital convergence. That's one. And I think the other one that we've seen a ton about in the news recently is the role that North Korea is taking in trying to
Mm,
exploit remote workforces and steal identities and put workers into companies, not to steal IP, but to launder money and get around sanctions. So suddenly you think you're getting
huh.
this great deal on a wonderful remote IT administrator, but that person is not who they say they are. The paycheck you're sending them is being routed through multiple banks, and it's going back to fund the nuclear program in North Korea. And I don't think any company would have expected that that was a thing that was on their HR bingo card this year.
I would never have guessed that one had you not mentioned it on Monday when we were chatting. The first one, I mean, I immediately think of the United Healthcare CEO. I mean, that's probably taking that physical bounty on a person or danger to an executive the farthest you can, which is the killing of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare. And that's one of the types that you're talking about. But this other one is something I never would have thought about. The North Korean planting of employees in order to launder money back to their military program.
Yeah, I
It's
think those are two
crazy.
different sides of the one is the risk to people,
Yeah.
this risk to the CEO. I think that created a bellwether moment, and I think a lot of the healthcare CEOs started seeing their faces on posters, and this was in New York City, and
Oof.
that kind of
Yeah.
thing was it really speaks to a larger dysfunction in how we've used digital means to divorce the way we think about each other as humans. It really uncovered a pretty nasty vein, but it wasn't new, and it was absolutely just the terrible culmination of how that risk is manifesting. And the other one,
Yeah.
the North Korean employment fraud scams, are more about the risks by people And how are people, individuals and organizations and networks thinking more creatively about how to do harm and how to get their way?
So what do we do? How do we protect? How do we monitor? How do we, what signals? Because, this is very much digital and physical, as you said. So it's that IT, OT overlay. And I'm sure it's across all different kinds of industries. How do you collect telemetry in all of those different quadrants? Like, what is human risk management then doing?
I think it's really trying to strive to understand who these threat actors are in real life.
Yeah,
In all seriousness, like we're
yeah.
trying to go behind the digital handle and get down to the motivations and actions and interventions that you can take once you better understand who the person is or who they're not in the case of some of those employment fraud.
No, I was just going to say that makes sense in the North Korean example, the employment fraud. In a more human realm, it seems that there are so many coordinating factors. You have to be looking at social media. You have to be educating on how to communicate in social media and how not to communicate in social media. There's like a secret service or physical protection, element to some of that. There's, oh, you're going to this particular region in the world. Let's look at what some of the geopolitical temperature is in that region and prepare for it. It's a big job,
It's a big
Ryan.
job,
And
and we don't solve all of it. I think that's the thing. I think we're trying to help companies who are trying to get their hands around all those different aspects. The nice thing about risk management is I think you are trying to consistently triage which things are most important to think about. What are your priorities? What are the areas that are most concerning? Which assets, which people are you most worried about protecting? Which people are exposing you to the most risk? And trying to constantly go through this triage motion. A lot of the open source data that you mentioned, social media and deep and dark web and other places certainly help inform that risk prioritization, and then you can figure out where to zero in and how to take action, whether to bolster the physical protection of your executives on a certain trip or in a certain area, or whether to think differently about your physical and cyber security controls around your people if you're finding that you've hired people who may be insider threats because of the connections, networks, and intentions they express outside your company. So I think there's a lot
so
of different ways to think through how to prioritize and triage, and then bring that back to decisions and actions.
it's way beyond cyber awareness and training, way beyond. It's much more complicated. It seems to me that Nisos works to elucidate all of the elements of the risk. And then do you also provide solution suggestions or remediation suggestions? And then who picks up the baton on that? Is it the client? Is it Nisos? Is it a little bit of both?
One of the things that I like about human risk that was like cyber 15 or 20 years ago is that it actually brings together multiple parts of an organization in ways that they hadn't collaborated before. So when you go back to like who takes up the baton, if I just start there and kind of work backwards, in those different human risk scenarios, there are different interventions available to you. When you're worried about people using deepfake technology to steal someone's identity and purport to be someone they're not during the interview process, the security team, if it's information security or corporate security, is partnering heavily with HR. There's a set of incentives that are completely counter to each other. The HR teams, the recruiting teams are working as hard as they can and as fast as they can to fill any open roles. The security team is working as hard as they can and as fast as they can to prevent malicious insiders from coming into the organization. Those two are
Right.
completely at odds, and so you've got to build sort of this really collaborative and appreciative sense for how the security team can make the recruiting teams look like heroes because they're still getting the right people in the door, but also manage the risk by keeping the wrong people out. So like
Yeah.
those kinds of things, like trying to figure out where the interventions are. Is it really simple management controls in the interviewing process where the standard is to keep your camera on, but every recruiter is like, yeah, it's okay. I know you're having a hard time with our tool or your laptop today or your bandwidth, so it's okay. We'll do this interview without the camera. Like you got to have almost a zero tolerance policy for those kinds of things. You have to be willing to reschedule. You have to be willing to do the things that really hold fast to those controls, because that's how every human risk adversary and every employment fraud scammer exploits the system. They do it through lots of different tools, but you've got to think through the places where you can hold the line. And it's really different when you're looking at a monitored existential threat to one of your threat of light to one of your executives. Those are way more time based. They're way more physical. You've got to have good partnership with law enforcement. You've got to have good partnership with your own bench of physical security providers, whether it's in different countries. If you've got executives who travel a lot of these companies have those capabilities. What they haven't done all the time is think agilely about how to inform them with intelligence. There are moments in time where things raise to the top of the news feed, and suddenly everyone's talking about it. I think it was Rich Bache, who's now over at AT&T. But I remember in one of his jobs, he one of his proudest moments was when the board would call him and be like, "What are we doing about this thing I read in the Wall Street Journal?" And he's like, "Remember the last board meeting? We already took care of it, and here's all the things we did." And they're like, "Oh yeah, that feels good. Thank you." Like that notion of staying on top of things and not letting the moment sway you back and forth is one of the best things a security executive can do. But I think in this space, we're trying not to be hyperbolic, and we're trying not to just react to the moment and the trends. Instead, we're trying to think of it through like, how do you do this more holistically? Because insider threat is not a new problem. Thinking about it in terms of what you can learn on the outside of your enterprise about those insiders, that's a new approach for how to do it.
Mm.
What else can that inform? How does taking a perspective on the who is behind it help you across all these different risk types? And how do you create some centers of scale and gravity in how you approach the problem? So as we're thinking about this with our clients, that's where we're spending time trying to help them think through ways to get kind of natural tie-ins across the programs they're already building and ways to advance them together as opposed to one threat at a time.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, thanks for that. And where do you see this going ultimately? What's going to be the next challenge in this area?
We're seeing it already. I think the people who are ringing the bell about the risks around AI generated harms are spot on. I think it's going to get
Mm-hmm.
harder and harder to deal with the scale of how these things come in as more AI generated threats, as more AI generated scams, as better tools that help these people amplify and accelerate the things they're trying to do. That I think that's going to be where it's going. And so we spend time trying to understand how to think through whatever this new AI kill chain is going to be. How do you move up to get back to the root cause of who's doing it and why are they doing it? Because that person and the motivation helps you better figure out what tools you have at your disposal to counter it.
And
It's going to be an
Right. And
AI versus AI arms race for
yeah,
detection and response as well, because that's how the threat actors are going to use it too.
yeah. It's interesting. There's some not philosophers, but well, I suppose they are commentators. One author who believes that the best way is to let the AIs fight each other, and whoever wins, that'll be that'll be the dominant one. Kind of almost like a free market economy type of idea. Um, but I
Yeah,
think
I've been trying to think about it in terms of just sci-fi movies that we've all
yeah,
grown up with, and trying
yeah,
to figure out which one we want to live in, because it's kind of hard to imagine. But
exactly.
there's
I
there's
do.
there's a world between Wall-E where everyone's living in space because we've destroyed the planet, and
Hmm.
we're so incapable of helping ourselves we float around in little pods, and the Matrix where we become the fuel for the AI.
Oh
I'm
gosh,
hoping that
no.
we land somewhere in the middle of those two.
Yeah, in the middle would
or
be
or
good.
a or iRobot, because I've been
Mm.
looking a lot recently at agentic AI, and so
Yeah.
you know is it going to be a who that is proliferating? I love that you bring this back to the human, and I would say yes, there's always a human behind it, but is there, question mark, question mark,
Well,
question mark.
that will be an interesting question. Yeah, it will become a
Mm-hmm.
persona and not a human.
And if agents are going out being our labor assistants and spinning up new SaaS platforms on our behalf, or creating a new identity for use in a service account, or with a credential, or with a certificate, or spinning up other agentic AIs to work with it on a particular mission that has been assigned by a human, it's somewhat autonomous, becoming more autonomous. There's even been some tests that have shown, I think it was Anthropic, showed that agents will sometimes stop communicating with the humans because the human was thwarting the mission, and it was determined to create, to accomplish the mission. So yeah, I think.
Well, I think that's so the recent one that in the test where the agent was determined to blackmail the human to get them to acquiesce to their will,
Yeah, I
to
think
their mission set. I think there are some interesting ones for sure.
yeah. There was one. I think that particular one, Ryan, was trying to bribe the operator because the test involved doing the tasks and then shutting itself down. and it knew that that was coming, and that was why it was trying to blackmail the
Hmm.
human to say, hey, maybe you don't shut me down.
Yeah,
I think from my part, and maybe being in Europe, it's perhaps obvious. We were talking about this earlier. It always comes down to regulation and at least some kind of code of practice, which may then be either implemented by the industry and or with government and or regulations and or laws. There's a kind of a sliding scale.
yeah. There was a study last year that was done, and I'll try to find it and send it to you guys. But I was looking into it, but there was the voluntary standards that a lot of the AI companies signed up to do, and most of the biggest ones did. And what they found was the rates of abuse of people creating non-consensual deepfake porn content or other things that violated terms of service
Yeah,
were much lower on the companies that signed those voluntary accords than the ones who didn't.
right.
So it was kind of interesting to see that, the ones who didn't were almost like purpose built to be abused,
Yeah,
and the ones who did were trying to push towards this better, higher goal. And they're also the ones who have really rigorous testing, and they're the ones who spend a lot of time thinking about trustworthiness and explainability and all those things. And the others are fine operating without that. I
yeah.
don't see in the U.S. any kind of inkling that regulation is going to come rein this in anytime soon. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I think the
Yeah.
current regulation or legislation coming through the Congress states that no state can create its own regulation around AI as part of this new federal bill that they're trying to push. So I
Right.
think that
Are
I
you
think it's
kidding?
quite the opposite,
Wow.
unfortunately.
Ryan, that's been great chatting with you. We could talk probably for another number of hours, but again,
We
as I
certainly
as
could.
I always say, we're running long, which is good, right? If it's a case that we're kind of how are you doing today? When it gets to
How
small
about those
talk,
Mets?
yeah. How's the weather where you are? Then we
Yeah,
know
we
it's.
never even got to Star Wars.
Oh
Jeez.
no! Oh
No,
no! Well, quick. Well,
that'll be the
no, we
next
won't.
time.
Well, that'll be the
No,
next time.
we'll do it. We'll have to have a follow up on that.
Yeah, we'll have to do that
We
because
will.
it's very important, which is your favorite film and why. And why.
And
Not just, you
why?
can't just throw it in there without anything. So listen, Ryan, thanks so much for being on. That was great. Please consider coming back on again. Appreciate the insights that you've given and also the kind of thoughts because, a lot of this is about an ongoing discussion and what's happening, and some of those topics are really important. So great to have your perspective in those. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It was fun, and I can't wait to see how it sounds when it all comes together. So
Great.
good luck with the editing knife on this one.
Fine. I shall sprinkle the magic fairy dust on it, and it'll sound awesome. Well, that was great, Christina. That was a really interesting chat with Ryan. Lots of stuff to talk about there and many topics to follow up with. So thank you.
Well, I really love, you're welcome. Thank you, Rory. I mean, I love the human element. We had Curtis Shelton on last week talking about the human element in the AI conversation, right? And the humans are still very important and very central.
Yeah.
And to talk about human risk management is a critical piece of where we are today, converging the digital and the physical risks into the human behind it that is either creating it or is being affected by it.
Yeah.
And so really, I thought that was a really interesting discussion. So again, thanks to our guest, Ryan LaSalle, for coming on.
Yeah, great. Very good. And I think we should probably wrap the show there, Christina. With another one done. That's episode 20. And we look forward to our coming of age episode, which will be episode 21, of course. And
next week we have Nate Case back.
Ooh,
he
excellent.
is at Clarity. He's the VP of Cloud Computing Cyber Solutions. Really great guy, interesting person to chat with. I'm sure it'll be a very philosophical discussion.
Excellent. That's what we like. We like those. Great. Thank you, Christina. Thanks, everybody, for listening. As usual, if you have any feedback or suggestions, please get hold of us either through our email, which I'll put in at the end of the show in the show notes, or through SpeakPipe, which is speakpipe.com/cyber_sidekicks. And we look forward to chatting with you and also for you joining us next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.